Good morning. You may remember that we were talking about B.F. Skinner and his theory of operant conditioning, which was a major force in psychology in the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s. The whole idea, the major move for Skinner was that stimuli get responses which then get good things, are reinforced. And the strength between the stimulus and the response is better. You're more likely to get that response to that stimulus. He wanted to take all of human behavior, all of animal behavior, and say it could be explained in this way. Okay, so that's what we've already talked about. One of the major challenges for Skinner was when people began to kind of take him seriously, right? So just his statement that even complex behavior could be explained this way. So people in psychology, but also in philosophy and other places, mathematics, began to say, hold on now, how could this be? Because what you do is really complex behavior that seems to be like the conglomeration of a whole bunch of behaviors all put together. But the reinforcement doesn't happen until the very end. So how could that come to pass? How do you get step one, sub-goal one, step two, sub-goal two, all the way up to sub-goal n, and now you get reinforced? Why did you do the first few things? Those weren't ever reinforced. How does that happen? See the problem? Like, if button press the food, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I accidentally press the button. But the things that I do as a human, but also other creatures, don't seem to be random little things. They're complex things. So how could we get to such a thing? So let me give you concrete. I'm not talking about super complex things, just things that are kind of everyday things. So you want to, you're going back to your dorm, you're going to open the door. Seems like this should be too hard. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that getting into the room, because it's your goal, to reinforce it. You can lie down finally, whatever it is that makes you have a more pleasant experience. Okay, so what do you have to do? Well, you reach into your pocket, take out your keys. The keys go, I think this is how it works, at least Bill used to. Key goes into the lock, turn the lock one way or the other. You know, but you may have to think about it for a second. You know, your hand knows, let's say. You turn the lock, turn the door handle, maybe while having to hold the lock still in position. Some work that way, not everyone. You push your way through while still holding all those positions. So every one of those little things, you could think about it as a behavior. And somehow you have to explain how you accidentally produce that in order to get reinforced, in order to use this theory, or so it would seem. See the problem? That's like what are the chances of you doing that by just probabilistically, like zero? Okay, so that's, you see the counter argument? And like, hold it now, how could that be? How could you do something even as simple, but also as complex as opening a door? How could you learn that through reinforcement kind of conditioning? Real problem. People were bothered. Skinner didn't seem to be bothered by it at all. He proposed that actually what's happening is that a process, which you'll see he turns into a procedure called shaping. Okay? So shaping is this idea that the environment reinforces you on all these little steps. So you take a little step towards the correct solution, and somehow, if this is going to work, the environment has to provide you with reinforcement. Now you're more likely to take that step. Now more random behaviors, take another step that happens to be in the right direction, metaphorically speaking now, that gets reinforced. See what I mean? So could this work? Well, he thought it could, and he wanted to explain lots of things, even including human language, which I'll get to in a minute, with this. first, let me show you this little clip of Skinner. So this is, he's doing a live demonstration with a pigeon demonstrating shaping. So if you know about demonstrations, there's this thing called the demonstration effect. It essentially means that anytime you try to demonstrate anything, no matter how simple, it will not work when you try to demonstrate it. So the idea that he would go in with a live pigeon and do this is kind of beyond the pale. But anyway, here he's going to be, and then we'll come back to this. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can make that any better. Very quiet today.
Bird has been
All right.
going to try out a pigeon now, and I will try to pick out some particular pattern of it and make it more frequent part of the bird. Bird has been already conditioned to eat from the types of sounds and light touches. Now we'll just watch its behavior a bit. Not doing anything in particular, you see. So I'm going to try to get it to do something. Suppose I take up the behavior of making a complete turn. What I do is simply wait for some part of that behavior. There's more of it. See, I will see if we can see this. Waiting for it to turn counterclockwise now. I reinforce that movement. I wait for a more pronounced movement than that. All the way around.
Okay, that's amazing. You would do that with an untrained bird in front of people. Like you thought you knew enough about how this was going to go down that you could make the bird turn all the way around. So that's very, very impressive. But you see the principle at work. It's very simple in this case. All he wants is, oh, you give me a little, and I'm going to reinforce you. Then you're going to have to give me a little bit more in order for me to reinforce you. Right, so he kind of makes this trajectory, if you will, right? So more and more and more and more through the behavior of the creature that gets him eventually what he wants. So what he's saying is, yeah, I understand. We're only reinforcing individual behaviors. That's how it's going to work. But given perhaps the structure of an environment that's reinforcing in this stepwise kind of way, maybe we could get really complex behaviors. Okay, so that's shaping. Again, it's reinforcement of increasingly good approximations of the to-be-learned behavior. Hopefully that makes sense now. But see what he's trying to do? So he's got this problem where he can't do complex things because the complex things are a chain of behaviors. Right? So it's a lot of steps to go all the way around. Which one gets reinforced? Well, initially just the first one. Eventually it takes two. Then it takes three. Eventually you go all the way around and then I reinforce you. Okay, so a simple example, but also a pretty impressive thing to do in front of a live audience. Okay, so pigeons. What does that have to do with it? Remember, what he's trying to do is find really simple ways to approach the big problem of learning. And pigeons are easier to work with, simpler in some ways than humans. Actually, humans are easier to work with in other ways. For example, they don't fly away. That would not be a good thing. So let's talk about operant conditioning with human behavior. This is where he really wants to have an impact, is explaining human behavior. So the crowning problem for people like Skinner and his competition is the problem of human language. human language is wonderful, but as a scientific problem, it's awful. It's a terrible problem, incredibly complicated. Nobody really understands where it comes from, how it works. And there is this additional phenomenon. Not only is it really complicated when you are doing it as an adult, but you don't obviously arrive here speaking human language. You arrive here without language. So how does early language learning or development, we're going to call it learning because we're in the learning mode right now, how does that work? Well, according to Skinner, what you're going to do is you're going to take this shaping idea and you're going to use it to slowly canalize, to close down the options on what the child can learn. And at the same time, build up increasingly complex behavior. So the story is supposed to go like this. You have a child who babbles like most typically developing children do. And it turns out, interesting fact, discovered here that you found, by the way, that children babble many, many more phonemes than their language contains. So, I said this first, the number of phonemes across all languages is huge. Your language, our language, English here, contains a relatively small subset of them. So as a babbling child, you're babbling phonemes that you're not actually hearing. Sounds like Skinner might be onto something, right? That's interesting. So the idea here is that the reinforcement for the child is being delivered by the parents. So when you, as a babbler, say things that are closer to your native tongue, let's say English, you make those phonemes, you get attention. Say, Mom. Oh, God. You called me mom. I'm not your mom, but that's okay. You called me mom. All right? And there's oh, that's good. What the hell just happened? That's good, right? And you're more likely to say that again. And then maybe after a while, we want a little more. So unless you say, Mama, Mom, yeah, we had Mom, right? That was good. But Mama, oh, you say Mama, right? Now we're, wow, that's amazing. Maybe now you put together a couple of phonemes that are like almost like a phrase. And now somebody brings you something like milk. All right, so that's what you kind of get the story, right? You get the idea that it's a random production of phonemes. Start putting them together with operant conditioning because you're rewarded for phonemes in the right class. Then you start putting them together some more to get the things you want, and next thing you know, we have language. Okay, so that's supposed to be the story, and there's something attractive about it because it doesn't seem to be, doesn't require a lot of special mechanism, right? It's just like, here you are, for whatever reason, you produce these phonemes, these sounds, speech sounds, and then you string them together under the regular old laws of learning, and we get language out of that. So, what I just hopefully described in a more summarized form. Sounds that are in the language get reinforced. Sounds that are outside the language don't. And then increasingly good approximations of the words get increasingly. All of which seems reasonable. So this has been a favorite, I would even call it like a perennial favorite. Like it comes back on the, it's like coming back around on the guitar again every once in a while. Be like, oh, you know what? It could be that this sort of thing is part of language learning. No one would say anymore that it's all of language learning, but part of language learning. And there'll be yet another attempt to show that something like this using maybe updated laws of learning or something, is actually happening. So there are, most of it focuses on parent-child interactions, and they'll try to get evidence of increased attention at key moments as if it were a reinforcer. So there's some evidence of it. There's also a huge body of work that says this couldn't work for like structural reasons, which I won't go into. So it turns out there's like you can make this into a mathematical theory, and it turns out only certain aspects of grammar could be developed this way. You needn't worry about that right now. But people have taken this proposal very seriously, to the extent that they've attacked it on a number of different levels. There's a major debate, which I'll talk about eventually, between Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, who's still around, it, sort of a founder of what we understand about grammar, and Skinner, way back in the day. And that back and forth kind of was part of the beginning of what we'll call the cognitive revolution, actually. All revolving around this issue. Okay, so that's shaping, very important for Skinnerian learning theory. Questions on all that? No? Language learning. Okay. All right, we'll go on to reinforcement. So everything we've talked about so far is pretty simple reinforcement. In fact, we haven't even been playing around with this aspect of it. But in the real world, it probably is the case that reinforcement is not in a one-to-one relationship with behavior. So what would that mean? Well, when we have for every behavior a particular consequence, okay? So I press the button, I get the food. I press the button, I get the food. This is the world we'd all like to live in, right? That would be nice. And we have a name for this. It's called continuous reinforcement. Okay, so I wish you continuous reinforcement schedules, but most reinforcement schedules aren't continuous, meaning that there can be some wiggle room, and we will define this wiggle room in various ways in a moment, between the behavior and the consequence. Okay? So you can do the thing, press the damn button, like food. This one. Press the button. Oh, there's the food. Press the damn button. More food, right? So that's more what the world is like. So think about a squirrel, right? You watch them. Now they're getting a little nutty this time of year, but you watch them look for places where they think they've buried a nut. Okay, so they go around like up there. Damn it, no. Right? They go to the next place. They dig. Right? So the behavior, the digging, gets reinforced with the nut every once in a while. That's what they mean by a schedule of reinforcement. It has some certain properties to it. They took this under control in the Skinner box laboratory kind of situation in a way that you're going to initially feel like it's very arbitrary. You can see that it's trying to map on what happens in the world, right? So if I'm a predator and my behavior of rushing onto the whatever it is I'm trying to eat, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So that's just the natural form of natural structure, how the world works. Okay? So when it's in a one-to-one relationship, again, it's called continuous. They picked out a couple of different ways to mess about with this. And we're going to name these things. Okay, they're going to be 2 dimensions. And then you're going to see there's some other stuff that I'm not going to really trouble you with, but you'll kind of see it out in the distance there. So the big name for everything else, okay, so we have continuous one-to-one. That's nice and simple. The trouble begins when we decide to move away from that. And now we have these things which are called partial reinforcement schedules, where behavior is reinforced. We'll just call it intermittently for now, which doesn't commit us to very much. It turns out that's going to cover a lot of territory. The weird thing and the exciting thing when they initially discovered this was somewhat counterintuitively, sometimes this produces stronger learning and stronger responding even than continuous reinforcement. Okay, so here we go with these dimensions. Hang on to your hats. Think, wake up if you've been sleepy, if you're drifting away, looking at your phone, doing something maybe. So ratio, roll these out, and interval. Should have maybe done that differently, but I didn't. So let's do ratio first. Ratio has to do with how many responses you give in order to get the reward. Okay, in one-to-one, it's one response, one reward. But in ratio, maybe it's 3-to-1. So I have to go 1, 2, 3, reward. 1, 2, 3, reward. Okay, it's a 3-to-1 ratio. That's why they're calling it ratio. Okay, this can happen in two ways. See how evil these before. Fixed ratio, as I just described, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, response. 1, 2, 3, sorry, 1, 2, 3, consequence. 1, 2, 3, consequence. You with me? Okay. But it could also be, and here's the variable. So I could say, oh yeah, 3 is good. Somewhere around 3. Sometimes it'll be 3. Sometimes it'll be 2. Sometimes it'll be 1. But sometimes it'll be 6. The average will be 3. With me? So that's a variable ratio schedule. Okay. Sorry, I just worked here. Okay, so that's, now you have ratio, and I snuck in this other thing about fixed and variable. And you weren't looking. Fixed means, in this case, the ratio doesn't change. It's the same all the time. 3 responses to 1 in my example. Variable means that moment to moment, how many responses you have to make for this trial changes, but the mean is set usually. Think about it. It's good. Okay? Question so far? Okay. What about this other dimension? Well, what else could you play with? The obvious thing was to play with the time. How long it is until another, we're calling them, consequence, reward, whatever consequence is good, is available. So it could be that you give a response, you get a consequence, and now the next one isn't available, no matter what the hell you do, for 5 seconds. So you could be, oh, get another nugget. And you have to wait 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, you, oh, look at another nugget. Okay, but you have to wait 5 seconds now for the next nugget. It's a fixed, always the same, fixed means always the same, interval, temporal interval, reinforcement schedule, or if you like, partial reinforcement schedule. So far, so good? You could also, evil buggers that these people were, have variable, right, following the same principle, variable interval reinforcement schedules. And the mean now would be, let's say, 5 seconds. Sometimes, though, it's available after 3. Sometimes it's not available until 6. Okay? Oh my goodness. How about you? But I'm tired already. Let's see if some examples can help us. Forget about that for 1 second. I'll come back. So let me just give you some example schedules just to make it concrete. then we'll get back to this weirdo looking graph. If you're like, what is going on there? So ratio, always about the number of events. I'm sorry, it's always, yes, it's always about the number of, let's say, button presses, behaviors, I should say. So here, this is the way they talk. So FR is the abbreviation for fixed ratio. So the rule might be every 5 presses, you get a nugget or consequence. Variable ratio means that on average, every 5 presses, you get a nugget. But sometimes you got to press 10 times. Sometimes you got to press 8. The average is going to be 5. With me so far? Okay. Too bad? All right, leave that alone for a second. Sorry, I'm going to do these first. Back. Interval. Again, we're talking about the timing now between the events. Fixed interval, FI, 5, every 5 minutes. Ooh, that's a rule. Long time, not available for 5 minutes after your last behavior. 5 minutes after the last. Variable interval 5 minutes on average after the last. Sometimes, 56. 3, sometimes it'll be 10 minutes. Okay, so hopefully these are now clear. Everybody all right? Questions on all that? Okay, so they started down this road, and you can just see this is like some smarty pants grad student going, hey, I know what we could do. And the advisor, well, that's a crazy idea. Right? Well, but go ahead and try it because it doesn't seem too hard. Right? And then out come all these very interesting things. So one interesting thing about it is that when you have ratio-based schedules, what does that mean? That means dependent on the number of responses that you're making, right? You get high response rates. So if you want to build a system where you want people to always be giving you response, it turns out making a schedule that's dependent on the number of responses is a really good idea. So a good example, slot machines. Slot machines are all about delivering, potentially, reinforcement to in this case, a variable number of events, right? If you knew how many coins you had to put in, it wouldn't be as much fun. Or it would be more fun. I don't know. But it wouldn't be the same, and you wouldn't put in as many coins, right? You would, right? So that's a good analogy, right? So you're sitting there, you want people to keep responding. No, here's a quarter, here's a quarter, here's a quarter, here's a quarter, and eventually there's a payout. It's a variable response schedule. Okay, so the response rate for both of these, we're going to say, are high, and that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing here. Okay, and I've tried to match the colors to some degree. I don't know how successful it was. So this is fixed ratio here, variable ratio here. And let me explain the rest of this graph because it's a wacky graph. You'll see these all over this kind of literature. So there's just time along here. And this is a strange y-axis. It's the cumulative number of responses, and it just lets you kind of watch the responses build up over time, where each one of the dots here is a reinforcement occasion. So the thing to take home is that this is a very steep slope, which means that you have lots of responding. and the fact that it is nice and linear for the most part means it's regular response. Okay, so that for both the ratios tight. Okay, so the fixed ratio and variable ratio, they're both high rates of response. And they tend to resist extinction very well. For fixed interval, we tend to get moderate response. And for variable interval, we tend to get also moderate response. Okay, response rate, like how often are you putting the quarter in? The resistance to extinction here, right, where we have fixed interval, is moderate. Where we have variable interval, it's very, very high. This is something that people have taken advantage of in other domains. Okay, so I'll give you some examples of a couple of these, some which are, I think, surprisingly in your life in a second, but questions about this generally before I go on. I'm assuming you know when I say resistance to extinction, I'm assuming you know what I mean, right? That is once the contingency is broken, right? Whatever it is, my putting the money into the slot machine is not delivering anymore, right? That would be the beginning of extinction. How long does it take me to not put money in anymore? Would be an example, right? Or I'm pressing the button and the food delivery system is not on today. How long does it take me to stop responding? Okay, questions on any of this? All right, so can you think of anything in your life that is a variable interval reinforcement system? Variable interval reinforcement system. It's probably in your pocket right now. Yeah, go ahead. Social media is a great example. Yeah. I was going to say your phone, but social media is really that's really where I was going, right? So social media is a wonderful example of a variable interval schedule. You're not controlling it, even though you only check it once in a while. The timing is controlled by factors that are beyond your control, right? That the timing is coming out of, well, the world, right? It's more or less at random for all you could possibly know about it. There's no way you could know what the mean is theoretically. I mean, there is a mean moment to moment, but it's a brilliant variable interval reinforcement schedule, and you may feel its pull sometimes, right? I mean, it's almost like, the rings of power. I mean, it's like, man, why is my hand going down to my phone? I feel that way sometimes. I don't even really do social media. Why do I need to check that thing? You've been trained to do that. Very, very clever. Maybe accidental, but it took advantage of this kind of learning theory, which is, and I don't think I hyped this up enough, super powerful. I mean, this stuff really works. This isn't just theory. This if psychology proved that anything worked, this stuff really, really works. So yeah, the marketing generally, the people who are in the business of trying to separate you from your money know all about this work and using it all the time. Okay, so other questions on this before we go on? So this is so hard to do. So Skinner had a lot more to say. Let me put it that way. But we need to move on. So we're going to talk about kind of the transition from behaviorism into what we would now call modern cognitive psychology. And it begins for us with this very clever fellow, Tolman. So Tolman, I'm not quite sure how he managed to do it, but he pushed on the idea that learning has a whole nother dimension to it, which he talked about as expectancy. You have to remember that these guys wanted stimulus response, nothing in between. That everything is on stimulus response connections. And Tolman comes out with this title, Cognitive Maps in Rats and Men. Today would be rats and humans. And he's questioning whether conditioning could explain everything that we do. Well, okay, that's reasonable. But then he comes up with these experiments, like right in the wheelhouse of Skinner. I mean, like right in his backyard. Very, very brave, but really very clever as well. So things like this, right? The way that an animal construes the environment is just as important to learning as environmental contingencies. Construes what? What does that mean? Well, it means how the animal thinks about the world, what it expects, is just as important as what the environmental contingencies are. Skinner's head explodes right there, the end of it. No, not really. But, they were going bananas. Because what they're doing, and what's going to happen, is they are going to open up a Pandora's box of explanation. You'll see. That's really nice. We had it all nailed down, right? And then along come these guys and say, oh, actually, check this out. So more stuff from Tolman. Humans and other animals are always developing mental representations and expectations about the environment. Stop already. Oh my God, it's gonna be. So not behaviorism at all. And people in the behaviors camp were very upset. And of course, now they want these cognitions to be integrated into the models. So let me tell you about one of Tolman's studies, which I think is super clever, right? So for Tolman, this is going to bridge us to the study. Do I have time to do this? I do. It's a beautiful study. You have to understand it. Learning exists outside of overt behavior. Big trouble for behaviorism. I mean, its name is behaviorism after all, right? Learning is all about you doing something, behaving, and getting a consequence. But they're saying learning can exist outside of that. So what's driving learning if it's not the consequence of your behavior? Oh my goodness, right? So the foundations of the psychological universe were shaking at this point. So here's this experiment that was one of many, many that this group did. And that, it's very, initially, you'll see it kind of really upsets the whole concept. So as I said, we're in the backyard of behaviorism. So we're doing things like learning mazes. And we're going to have, initially, rats in mazes doing 10 trials for 10 days. And what that means is you have a maze, maybe the maze would fit on this table. There's an exit box, there's an in box, and the rest of it's a maze like this. Rat goes in. Rat can't climb out. Rat goes in. Rat does some stuff. Eventually gets to the exit box. Tries. There is a most direct way to the exit box. If you're off the most direct way, you are making a wrong turn. And that's what we're counting the number of errors. Okay, simple. we're gonna have two groups, a non-reinforced group and a reinforced group. We're gonna split this non-reinforced group into two in a moment. But for now, let's just think about it that way. And by reinforced, we simply mean that at the end of each run, when they get to the little box, they get reinforced. Morsel for you. There we go. Right, there's food essentially at the end of the phase. So if there's reinforcement here and no reinforcement here, well, what should we expect? According to behaviorism, these guys, non-reinforced guys, should not be learning nothing because there's no reinforcement to drive learning. Right? That seems like a perfectly sensible thing to say. The reinforced one should be learning. So far, we haven't said anything that's interesting at all. That's just like the whole setup. Right? This is now he's gonna throw a little curveball in there. Okay? But let me show you the kind of initial data here. So the red guys here, okay, are going to be our never non-reinforced group. That is, they never get any food. These poor buggers, they never get any food in response for getting to the end of the maze. And this green group here, up until day 10, I haven't told you about their details. This is the group that's going to kind of splinter off. They too are not reinforced during those first 10 days. Okay, they're on top of each other. They're pretty much the same. These guys are learning. So this is average error. So learning is actually evidenced by going down. The fewer number of errors, the better you're learning. And so these guys are learning just like we would expect. So far, Skinner's like, yeah, of course. That's just how it should work. Right, so far, so good. These guys are going to be the trouble for Skinner. He's going to take half of that A group and he's going to split it into what we'll call the C group. And they're reinforced after the 11th day. Okay. Well, let's keep in mind that during the first 10 days, they weren't reinforced. So nothing to drive learning. Okay. So they should be like starting de novo, starting from scratch on day 11. So, here's day 11, and suddenly there's reinforcement at the end. Okay, these guys, of course, aren't reinforced, remain relatively poor. But these guys who suddenly get reinforced starting on day 11 apparently have learned quite a bit over this previous 10 days because suddenly they are at performance that's at least as good, maybe even better than the reinforcement group. Big trouble. So why is it big trouble? Because there shouldn't have been anything driving reinforcement for that group in these 10 days. Because all learning is driven by reinforcement. Right? So this non-reinforced group, this green group, doesn't get any reinforcement this year, shouldn't have any learning until that first time. And suddenly they know exactly how to do it. As good as the group that's been reinforced for now multiple days. Did not happen. See the problem? So what's the explanation? Well, Tolman says it's obvious what's happening here. You have this thing called latent learning. Latent learning, what do you mean? Well, latent learning is the learning that I'm doing as a creature just walking around. I'm not getting reinforced. I don't get a nugget from coming over here, but I'm learning about it. I come over here and I learn about this. Not about stimulus response. It's about just picking up the information and, according to Tolman, storing it someplace in these cognitive maps. So now I have a cognitive map. You start reinforcing me for that, going over to that red chair. I've been wandering around here for 10 days. I know exactly I can get to that chair. No problem. I could get there efficiently. I know the whole place. So that's his explanation. Like it or not, the behaviorists really didn't like it, but it does seem like there's something else going on here. let me go back because I think it's clear. Does anybody have questions? You understand Tolman's argument? Questions about what he's trying to do? Oh, okay. All right, let's. Who is it? Is that an 8? No, it's only a 6. Ah, good. All right, so let's talk about expectancies. Right now, the lid is off the Pandora's box of explanations. We can roll out all sorts of things. Jumping up now to humans, maybe humans have these things too. Maybe humans do late learning. Maybe they develop those beliefs, expectancies, opinions, all sorts of things that could alter their behavior that aren't being developed from reinforcement directly. You know, these people are still kind of working their way off of the root that is learning theory. Okay, so it's going to take a little while. So now the idea gets introduced by a fellow named Jules Roeder that an individual's expectations about an outcome, expectations, not the actual thing, may make a behavior more or less likely. So if I expect to get reinforced for, I don't know, being kind, maybe that will make me more likely to be kind. This doesn't necessarily have to be driven by direct experience. Right? You can just form such an opinion. You know, maybe somebody told you, and that would be enough. So, if one expects a behavior to produce a reinforcing consequence, one will perform it as long as able. Right? So here, the expectation is kind of standing in for what used to be your history. Right? And by your history, I mean your stimulus response history. Right? Oh my goodness, big trouble. So this can lead to things, and you can see we're starting to edge into like social theory. Things like self-fulfilling prophecy. So an individual knows that they're going to fail an exam. Therefore, because they already know they're going to fail, they don't study, and then they fail. Right? So here, an expectation about what the consequence is going to be changes the probability of the behavior, right? And now, in turn, actually makes that the outcome of the trial, so to speak. Right? So self-fulfilling prophecies come out of this. And we get this idea, which was developed by this guy, Jules Roeder, who actually was also here at UConn for a while. He's at Ohio State for a little while, then ended up here. At the end of his career, this thing called locus of control. So what a lot of people in social psychology and kind of related, like personality psychology even, started talking about was that there seems to be like a general tendency for individuals to make attributions about whether they are in control or whether the environment is in control. And they call this locus of control. All right, so it's as it says here, a generalized expectation. It's like it wouldn't necessarily have to be in place every time, but on average, you tend to think that you're in control or the environment is in control. Okay? So if you have an internal locus of control, that's you're more likely to take action. If you have an external locus of control, you're more likely to be passive and let the world run things. I will tell you more about this next time, and we'll talk about Bobo dolls as well.